Good morning, all. We're going to do part 2 now of some of the parallels within the parallels of Joseph Atwill's work, and have a look at the Demons of Gadara episode. Now, this happens in, I think it's Luke 8, and we're going to see how this episode tallies very nicely with Josephus's a part of Josephus's wars. We're going to see sequential parallels and specific themes, and a kind of crude humor, perhaps, begin to emerge. And obviously, the thesis here is that, for those who might not know, is that Josephus's wars is the master text for the Gospel of Luke. It's also it's apparent as well in other Gospels, but Luke's Gospel is the one that carries the most of these parallels here. So, the introduction: Joseph Atwill in Caesar's Messiah, the Flavian Signature Edition, argues that the New Testament story of the Demons of Gadara, this is in Mark 5, Matthew 8, and Luke 8 as well, is a typological satire of events described in Josephus's Wars of the Jews, particularly the Roman campaign against Gadara and the final siege of Jerusalem. He asserts that the Gospels, far from being records of divine revelation or independent tradition, were crafted as sophisticated Roman propaganda designed to mock Jewish messianic expectations and justify Roman rule. Core parallels between the Gospels and Josephus here. Atwill's thesis rests on a sequence of literary and thematic parallels between Synoptic Gospels and Josephus's historical narrative. So, Gospel elements here we have, and I'm going to list them here: demoniac possessed by Legion. It's the name. Yeah, we are Legion, right? Josephus's parallels. John of Gadara, the tyrant who absorbed the rebellion into one head. Satirical interpretation: John, as the central source of rebellion, is demonized here by the Romans. It's a legion of demons, Sicarii factions that spread rebellion. This is the legion in Josephus, and the satirical implication here is the fanatics as literal demons infecting the land. Okay. Demons enter swine. This is interesting. So this is the Sicarii conscripts recruited by force. Here in Josephus's parallels, the swine represents the unclean masses infected by rebel ideology. So wider context. 2,000 pigs drown in the sea. Mass drowning of rebels in the Jordan. This is Wars 4-7. So you see here that 2,000 pigs, the swine are infested with these demons, right? In a more creative sense in Luke here, you're talking more figuratively. The pig's fate mirrors the rebels' deaths. The number 2,000 and 200 matches the captured Sicarii. Okay, so there's 200 out, but 2020. Demoniac dwells in tombs, cuts himself with stones. John and Simon hide in caverns. Tombs, Simon with stone cutters. So it's all in there. It's very interesting. Black comedy, cutting with stones, stone cutters, pun. 2 demoniacs in Matthew, again, so we can switch to Matthew now. 2 rebel leaders, John and Simon, again. So same name as Matthew, doubles the satire, aligning 2 demoniacs with 2 rebel tyrants now. The demoniac healed, sent to Decapolis. John of Gadara imprisoned before in that region. In that region. Getting Josephus. Jesus' act symbolizes Roman mercy towards John, which happens in Josephus. It's all talked about here. So Jesus and Josephus, the parallel language and judgment. Atwills further supports this thesis by comparing Jesus' apocalyptic sayings with Josephus' condemnation of the Jewish rebels. So Jesus repeatedly calls his contemporaries a wicked generation. Matthew 12, Matthew 17, Matthew 23, Matthew 24. Josephus calls the rebels a generation more atheistical than those of Sodom. This is Josephus calling the rebels here atheistical. Okay. That's in War 5, 13, 6, and says, no age bred a generation more wicked. This is in War again, 5, 10, 5. Josephus' own definition of demons as spirits of the wicked aligns with the gospel theme of demoniac possession. Okay, apostolic parody, Simon and John. Atwill extends the parody by interpreting the apostles Simon, Peter, and John as veiled representations of the rebel leaders Simon bar Goria and John of Gischala. John 21, 8, 24 now, so we're moving over to John. Depicts Simon's coming, a martyrdom, bound, taken where he does not want to go, and John survives. However, in Josephus, Simon is bound, taken to Rome, and executed. John is spared and imprisoned for life. Jesus' prediction to Simon that his death will glorify God matches Simon's Roman parade death glorifying Vespasian, styled as a god. The text deliberately avoids naming the apostles directly, referring to the disciple whom Jesus loved, and Peter, and we know that they are John and Peter, Simon Peter, right? The Gospels, so there's the same name. The Gospels, paraphrasing, mirrors Titus' treatment of the rebel leaders, with Simon led to execution and John spared in the same order in both texts. In the Gospel of John, the Apostle John is referenced to only by epithet, the disciple who Jesus loved, of course, the one who wrote these things, and never directly named. Atwill argues that this is deliberate literary technique to obscure the connection between the apostle and John of Gischala. Likewise, Peter is used instead of Simon. This pattern is consistent with Atwill's theory that the Gospels and Josephus function as a coded intertextual system as they come down to us today, challenging the reader to connect characters across texts. Atwill provides a comprehensive comparison table highlighting the final fates of Simon and John in both narratives. The parallels at the conclusion of the Gospels and Wars. So the characters are named Simon and John, appear in both texts. Both are judged at the end of the campaign. Jesus' ministry, Titus' Judean campaign, of course, Simon is bound and taken where he does not want to go, to Rome. Simon ben Goria, taken to Rome and executed. John is spared. John of Gischala sentenced to life, but imprisonment, but he is spared death. Simon follows Jesus. Of course, Simon follows Titus. Triumphal procession. He would have been tied to the back of a procession. So this sequence, Atwill claims, is too specific to be coincidental. He emphasizes that the New Testament and Wars of the Jews consistently uses indirect identifiers rather than names, turning the reader's task into a kind of intertextual intelligence test. And now we can go to the Bayesian probability of coincidence. It's quite interesting here. One thing I want to raise very quickly is that these Jewish rebels in the wilderness, I think, are obviously infected, as Josephus says, by this guy John. And in one of the examples here of the demoniac in a John, the legion of demons here is then infected or put into swine, and the swine then run off a cliff. This is exactly the same in both of these sequences as well. The rebels are pushed or forced off of a cliff and die. Many of them die. So that's one I think it wasn't entirely explained properly in this, but I wanted to make that very clear because it's a really interesting parable. You get the idea of a demon, a demoniac, rebels who are talked about as demons or possessed. They are referred to as swine, I think. In Luke, the swine are then led off of a cliff. I thought that was a very interesting parallel. Using the conservative academic approach, we may ask, what are the odds of these 10 specific narrative parallels between the New Testament and Josephus' wars occurring by pure coincidence in the same sequence with a similar language, even if generously estimating that each parallel might randomly align with a 1 in 4 chance. The probability of 10 parallels in sequence is a very small number. It's infinitesimally small on coincidence. So it's 1 in 1,048,576. This result, calculated conservatively, suggests it is statistically implausible that these parallels arose independently. Rather, the probability distribution strongly supports the hypothesis of intentional literary construction or intertextual dependence. Alright, so I will leave that there, I guess. This Bayesian outcome reinforces Atwell's broader argument. The Gospels were not composed as independent, spontaneous records of oral tradition, but as part of a Roman effort to recast the Jewish war in theological terms. If true, this reading overturns the common narrative of Gospel origins and places Roman literary strategy at the heart of early Christianity. So that's all rather interesting, and we've already been through in another video the fact that so many of these parallels actually appear in a modified version of an early Gnostic, Marcion's Gospel, and that so many more of these parallels then come into effect now with this, the new Luke, if you like, or Roman Luke, if you want. I think it's further helps to support the idea that Luke in its final form was heavily worked along by the Romans, and that the Romans had a big impact, and people within the empire, literary elites, had a huge impact in the final formation of that gospel. And of course they're putting with other gospels as well, they're cunningly putting in Greco-Roman mythology as well. Not cunningly, but just as this method of mimesis and emulating the great epics of their traditions, of their culture. So I'll leave that there for now. Hopefully tomorrow, I'm going to be in Munich tomorrow, so I might be able to put out a video. I hope I will. I'll take the kit with me so I can hopefully do all that. All right, cool stuff, and it'll be the sequence involving Jerusalem and the sacking of Jerusalem, which we're again going to find all of these connections to in Josephus. And these are just a few of the parallels, remember, and they are parallels within parallels. So it's really rather a strong argument I favour. All right.